Hi, my name is Sue McCleaf-Nespeca, and I'm here today to talk about fall books from 2019 and some that I would recommend. This presentation is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Office of Commonwealth Libraries. So we'll begin. The first book, called Maybe Tomorrow, is one I think we really need in our collections. It's just a little bit more unique than anything I've ever seen. I feel that the story is talking about the death of a friend, so it could be used for that or the death of a parent or whatever, but actually it could represent anything regarding depression or anxiety or sadness. So we have Elba, who's a pink hippopotamus, and she is weighed down by this very heavy block, as you can see here in the first page. She's tethered to it. And she's very sad. She's been dragging this block around. Well, along comes Norris, who is an alligator, and he's very upbeat and happy. He's dancing up the hill. And he can see that she has a problem of some sort. And he keeps trying to convince her to go with him places, like go with me on a picnic, go here, go there. And she doesn't really want to do it. She's not interested in going or having fun. So he talks to her about the box, and it's actually a block, she said. So this block actually represents her sadness or her depression. Now, it takes a long time until Norris finds out that she has lost her friend, Little Bird. We don't really know what happened to Little Bird. Did Little Bird die? Did Little Bird move away? We don't know. But what we do know is that the whole thing is just really weighing her down. So eventually he does convince her to go some places. He helps her carry the block. But what is really moving in the story, as you're watching it, you notice the block is getting smaller and smaller. You can see it in the progression of the pages until at the very end it is very tiny. She's sitting on it, it's very tiny. And so his friendship is actually, of course, helping her get over this depression or sadness or anxiety. Again, it's a really different book, and I don't honestly think we have anything quite like it in our collection. So that's one I would highly recommend. The next book is a brand new imprint. And the imprint was started by Kwame Alexander. It's his new imprint. And of course, he is a very well-respected author in children's literature. And this first book that he has under his imprint was illustrated by Kadir Nelson. And as you know, Kadir Nelson is one of our most respected children's book illustrators today. So this book is called The Undefeated. It was originally performed actually on ESPN. It's a poem, but now it's done in picture book format. And it features collages of African Americans from various disciplines. And it also is showing various historic moments in our country. Nelson's illustrations are just incredible in this book, as all his illustrations are in all his books. So it's very beautifully done. And what it talks about, again, are different parts or different things that happened in history. For example, it refers to not only black athletes, writers, musicians, and activists, but it talks about issues of American slavery, the slave trade, the black troops during the Civil War, fighting for civil rights, right up to Black Lives Matter. So it's really kind of covering a history of the African American experience through picture book format in a very gorgeous, gorgeous book. Okay. I like to talk about little board books now and then, and there's two here I want to mention that are part of a series. One's animals and one's food. And this is really wonderful for young children in relation to vocabulary, to help them when they're learning to talk, to be able to, you can almost use it as a point and say book, where the parent would point and the child would say the word, in this case frog. As you notice, or if you can tell, I don't know if you can tell or not, but the letters are actually raised relief, so you can also feel the directionality of the letters, which is kind of neat. And then if the child's getting a little bit older, there's also a lot of other words that relate to the frog or things you're seeing on this page, like lily pads and dragonflies. And so there's a lot of other vocabulary words that are on each double page spread. So you have the animal, the raised relief, but then there's even more ways that you could talk about some of the different things they're seeing on the page. And the two that I have that came out this year in the series, one is animals and one is food. So that's a series I would recommend. If you haven't purchased it yet, you might want to think about getting that series. Okay, this was our pack by Ryan Andrews. This story takes place in a town where they celebrate an autumn equinox festival. And the townsfolk actually release lanterns into the river every single year. This is something they do yearly. And what these boys, this group of boys, always ride their bikes along the river, and they want to follow the lanterns. They go for a long time, and then after a while, they just give up. Well, in this particular year, two boys are going to follow the whole way. And it's a very incredible journey. There's a lot of surprises, magic, even hints of murder. So there's a lot happening. It's like escape fantasy. I would recommend it to kids who possibly like Wrinkle in Time would be a good example of who to recommend it to. Rising Water. This is the story, if you remember, the soccer players in Thailand that were in the cave and needed to be rescued. Well, Mark Aronson actually did a book on this because it was a period of time in our history where the whole country, the whole world actually was gripped, trying to find out what was going to happen to these boys. Were they going to live? Were they going to be trapped in this cave forever? It has very detailed research. It's told chronologically, and it gives insight into Thai culture. It talks about how it required interrelationships among countries to actually make the rescue possible. And it also very interestingly gets into how media depicts these things that are happening and how some things are only partial truths sometimes. And we have to kind of sort through and figure out what's true about this and what might not be true. The next book I'm going to show you is called A Friend for Henry. And even though it does not state this in the book, I would say that the book is probably, or the boy, is probably on the autism spectrum. When he enters his class, he stands apart from all the other children. His body is stiff, his face is kind of blank, but he actually is looking for a friend. But everyone in that room is just too much for him. He can't handle all the different kids. Like some kids are messy, others don't follow the class rules. Some get too close to him and that bothers him. He wants to organize everything, so he organizes the carpet squares and another boy just throws them all apart, which makes Henry have a tantrum. Finally, he meets this one little girl, Katie, who's a really quiet child who just enjoys reading, and she's kind of a lonely child herself, and the two bond and they have a little bit of friendship. I think it's kind of a neat book because even though it doesn't necessarily say he has autism, it is a child who is maybe a little different, and it's how he adjusts to his classmates, and just the friendship between the two is just really nicely developed. This book is actually for teens. It's called Viral, and it is really basically the whole history of AIDS in America and how the crisis started. It talks about the Stonewall riots, how in the 70s there were a lot of bathhouses and dance clubs and drugs and disco music and a lot of free love, and how it first attacked basically gay population, but then we know it wasn't just the gay population. We know that people of color and other marginalized groups also become victims of the HIV/AIDS panic. So it's a very well-researched book. I don't know if any high school students would need to do maybe reports and something like this, but it's, it's very well done on that. Okay, C.C. Bell has won actually a Geisel Award before, or Geisel Honor actually. And this is another one of her new I Can Read or early reader books. And the title alone is funny. It's called Smell My Foot. And it is the first in a series of books that are going to be about Chick and Brain. And as you can see, the brain matter there on the character is kind of funny. Oh yes, I forgot to mention, it shows here in the book she also was a Newbery Honor winner, so she's done a lot of things from different levels. But I think her I Can Read books, or easy reading books, are really popular. This is kind of like a little graphic novel in an I Can Read format. Brain keeps asking Chick to smell his foot, and Chick doesn't want to. As it turns out, his foot actually smells good. So along comes a dog, and he wants to actually have Bird for lunch, but Brain understands what's happening, and he saves the day, knocking over the dog with his other foot, which it turns out the other foot is stinky. So that's probably why he kept mentioning about smell my foot, because he actually had one foot that didn't stink. So it's kind of funny, but it's really good for an I Can Read reader book. I found this next book very interesting. It's the history of Crayola crayons. I mean, whoever thought about how Crayola crayons were invented? Edward Binney, who was an American businessman and inventor, in the early 1900s, he was actually making dustless chalk for teachers, but the customers were demanding something more, and they wanted something colorful. So he worked and worked and worked and worked to come up with just the right materials. He had experimented a lot and it's a top secret formula that eventually became Crayola crayons. Now, of course, the illustrations in the book, I love the end papers alone. They're crayons, the end papers. But the book is done in what looks like Crayola art. It's very bright colored art. And a really interesting thing that I found particularly interesting is in the back of the book, it actually has illustrations of how Crayola crayons are made today. So it's a very neat nonfiction picture book, because kids can see exactly how they're made. And it also talks about, there's another whole page on him, a lot of primary sources and extra materials in the back of the book. So very well done. If I were on the Cybert committee this year, I would certainly be looking at this as a possible prize for an informational book, because I think it's extremely well done. The next one's just kind of funny. It's The Very Impatient Caterpillar. It's one that I think you could use in a story time program. The caterpillar sees all these other caterpillars up in a tree, and he doesn't know what they're doing there. I guess he's not a really bright caterpillar. And they say, well, we're going to metamorphosize. And he said, meta what now? Transform into butterflies. Oh, yeah, right, I knew that. Well, he really didn't know it, of course. He says, wait, you're telling me I could become a butterfly with wings? For real? So now he's all excited. They tell him to build his chrysalis. Oh, chrysalis, yeah, I knew that, which of course he didn't. Then they tell him to spin, and then just let nature take its course. Well, while they're waiting, he keeps saying, am I a butterfly yet? No. How about now? No. Now? No. And he's impatient. That's the title of the book. And so, and they tell him to be quiet. We're trying to metamorphosize. How long does this take? 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Can I get a comic book or something? How about a snack? Can you give me a snack? How long have I been in here? Is it day one yet? How long? And so finally, he can't wait any longer. He comes out, and he says, am I a butterfly now? No, not yet. So he has to go back in again. And at the very end, of course, it's very funny, but at the very end, he says, I did it. I became a butterfly. So this would be a good book if you're doing a story time on, butterflies or metamorphosis. It'd be wonderful. You could also tie it into, teachers could tie it into a unit, a fiction story into the unit also about butterflies. Liberty Arrives is the whole history of how we got our Statue of Liberty, how it was a 100th birthday gift from France. It was the brainchild of a French judge who envisioned it as a symbol of friendship between our two nations. They chose New York Harbor as the site, but then it took forever to build it. You probably heard it was shipped in crates in America, but it was 9 years after the centennial till we actually got it. The iron skeleton was actually, to support liberty, was actually devised by Eiffel. I'm sure you heard of Eiffel Tower. But a lot to look at. There's interesting facts in the book about measurements and the timeline, different facts about the statue and historical figures involved with it. But we know kids like dinosaurs, but what's kind of interesting about this one, this was a dinosaur that was discovered. It's called a titanosaur. And it was actually one of the more modern day paleontologists' discoveries. They were in Patagonia, and they had these bones displayed, and this one farmer came and said, well, I have bones in my farm just like this, but they're much larger. And that's when they went to discover that they found this, excavated and reconstructed this 100 million year old titanosaur in Patagonia. And so one nice thing about this book is it talks about really how paleontologists work, how they uncover the bones. So it goes through that, so it has that other whole side to this book. It will work well for kids that are curious about how a paleontologist does do his digs. Wonderful color photos, and there's actually a completed skeleton shown in the book. We all love Eric Carle, and this book is a good one for very young. It has a padded cover, has this little mirror on here, and just a few words per page. Now, okay, there might be a little bit of things you have to think about in relation to circulation. Anytime you get the flaps, when I worked in libraries, we always just put some tape down on the hinge of that flap, and it would last in many circulations. But we have some touch and feel here. What it does, it talks about, okay, this is what things I see in my home, things I see outside, things I like to play with. So each double-page spread talks about something else. This is things to eat. So again, you could use it kind of as a point and say for kids to name what the object is. But, you know, and there's also, you know, die-cut holes. So there's a lot going on, a lot of touch and feel that would be very good. It's very sturdy, though, so it'd be very good for very young children. Allie Carter is a very prominent teen author. She's actually a New York Times best-selling author. And this is a book about how to write a book. How do you write books for teens or children? So this is her whole guide. She talks about how you get topics, how you develop the plot, how you can create characters, you know, and it's all done in a question-answer format. You know, how you send it off to the publisher, how it takes rewriting, and tremendous amount of time and effort. She also interviewed other people for this book. She interviewed other teen authors like Holly Black and Marie Lu, and so you get, everyone does their process a little different. So you get how other authors do their process. It talks about how books are edited, and then the whole publishing phase. So I think for anyone who wants to write books, this would be one even to recommend to adults. I know when I worked in libraries, one of the most common questions I would get is, how do I get a children's book publisher? How can I want to write children's books or teen books? I mean, this would be a good one to even recommend to adults. Jennifer, the author of this book, actually wrote the Al Capone books that are extremely popular with kids. And one actually won a Newbery Honor, I forget which. Anyhow, so this is a new series by her called 1/3 Nerd. It's for a little bit younger readers than her Al Capone books that were really more for teens. This, I would say, would be for more like grades 3, 4, 5, maybe 6 at tops. The main character's story is actually in 5th grade. It's Liam, and his mom and dad are divorced, so he is the one who's kind of taking the reign with his 2 younger sisters. one second grader, Dakota, excuse me 1 second here while my little table fell down. I'll try to be more careful. Second grader Dakota does a lot of science experiments, and that really bothers the neighbors. We have first grader Izzy, who actually has Down syndrome. So he has a lot on his hands. But even more so, what's bothering him right now is he has a dog. The family loves this dog. And Cupcake, his dog, is having some problems right now, and he's peeing all over everything, which is bothering the landlord. So this poor little boy, Liam, has a whole series of things to deal with in this story. There is a lot packed into it. There is some serious sides, but there's also a lot of humor. It's kind of like a slice of life book, slice of life story, and I think it's one you could even use as a read aloud. As you could this one too, by Colfer, who has done the Artemis Fowl books, which are extremely popular. Again, this one's for a little bit younger than that series. I would say grades 2, 3, and 4. And this book is one that just tears at my heart. Anytime you have a story of an animal that was abused, it's really, really difficult for me to read. This poor little dog was abused by a man, then he was adopted by someone else, and they abandoned him. And then he had this other family that was very cruel to him. So what the dog learned to do was to not bark. He was totally quiet, because he knew if he barked, he was going to be punished, or he was going to be starved, or they were going to get rid of him. So he just never, ever, ever barked. He's a very sad dog. Going through the separation of his parents, and he's having a very hard time. So he adopts this dog. He names him Oz. And he wants to do whatever he can do to help Oz find his bark again and to have some happiness in his life. But while he's helping Oz do that, Oz is also helping him because he's going through this terrible time with his parents' separation. It's a very heartwarming story. It's told in short little chapters. It's told through 2 voices, the dog's voice and the boy's voice. And it's just a nice little chapter book. Obviously, animal lovers will especially enjoy it, but I think any child would. But animal lovers, it's definitely recommended to them. Olive and Pico in 4 Short Walks. These are 2 dogs who are good friends. Got a lot of dog stories here. 2 dogs that are good friends. One's a puppy, one's an older dog, and the older dog can't keep up with the puppy. But they kind of look after each other and become really good friends also. It's a picture book that highlights the joy that can be shared among friends when they can respect and celebrate each other's differences. Giselle Potter's the illustrator. Of course, she's a very famous illustrator. Well, when this book came out, I thought, wait a minute. I knew that unfortunately we had lost Anna Dewdney, who had done the Llama Llama books, and they were so popular. So I thought, okay, well, sometimes they find manuscripts that even though the person has died, they find manuscripts that have never been published. And I thought, okay, that's probably what happened in this case of Llama Llama, Mess, Mess, Mess. But that's not what happened. And actually, we might be seeing a lot more Llama Llama books in the future. These are actually being done now by, if they say an Anna Dewdney book, but it's actually being done by Reed Duncan, who is a former reading instructor, English teacher, and school administrator. And he and Anna lived together in an old Vermont farmhouse. He was her longtime partner, and he's now the director of the Anna E. Dewdney Literary Trust. So he's the one that is writing the books. Okay, so where's the illustrations coming from? Because if you look at this, to me, they look exactly like Anna Dewdney's illustrations. And the gentleman who's writing the book does not illustrate. So where are the illustrations coming from? I found this very interesting. You read the back of the book, sometimes you find a lot of interesting information. The person who is illustrating was called, his name is J.T. Morrow, and he's an award-winning illustrator, but his main skill and what he's known for is his ability to paint in the style of other artists. So they found someone who can imitate Anna Dewdney's art. His work has included imitations of Rembrandt to Norman Rockwell, and now he's doing the Llama Llama books. So I just found that all very, very interesting. This is actually part of a trilogy. This is Kate D. Camilla, who of course, is not only a New York Times bestselling author, but is one of the most acclaimed children's authors living today. And if you had the other two books in the series, you'll certainly want this one. The first one was called Raymie Nightingale, and then the second one was called Louisiana's Way Home. And this third one actually focuses on one of the other girls. The three girls were friends, and this focuses on Beverly, who's now 14. Her dog has died. She feels like she's left behind by everyone. Her mom's an alcoholic, so she leaves and gets a job at a restaurant. She's taken in by this really nice older woman, but eventually she realizes that she left Raymie behind and she needs to go back. K.D. Camillo just has such a way of writing. It's multi-layered. It's not lighthearted necessarily, but it's very heartwarming and a very touching story and a wonderful end to that trilogy. So K.D. Camillo also has a series of early reader books about this character. Mercy Watson had been extremely popular. They've won some Geisels too. This is actually a prequel to those books, and it is not an I Can Read book. It's actually a picture book. So it's a picture book about Mercy Watson, and the reason I'm saying it's a prequel is because this is the story of how Mercy originally came to the family, to Mr. and Mrs. Watson, because when the first book starts, the reader book, Mercy's already a member of the family. So this gives you the background of how Mercy became part of the family. Basically, there was this pig transport, and one piglet bounced off. Well, that was Mercy. And he just kind of walked up to their house, and the rest became history there. So it's, again, it's a picture book. It's not a beginning reader, but it, I think, will appeal to kids, whether they know the other Mercy stories or not, because K.D. Camillo is obviously such a wonderful writer. I found this really interesting. This is the story of the Monuments Men, which I had not heard about, and then as soon as I saw this book and started reading it, I started seeing things in the news about the Monuments Men, so it just kind of tied in. So basically, this is a true story, and it talks about how there were 11 military men and one woman who fought to preserve and rescue some of the world's most valuable works of art during World War II, because Hitler was having everything destroyed. The items have been stolen from German, French, and Italian museums, and also from prominent Jewish families under the direction of Hitler. And this describes how these monuments men actually were able to get a lot of this back. They followed tips from various sources. They were able to locate the stuff. Even while the war was raging, they were finding some of this. There's a lot of black and white photos. It talks about the heroes of the movement, the villains, and many of the art objects. So I think anyone that's interested in, say, the history of World War I, this is maybe a little sidelight with the art, but I think it's very, very interesting. And this is D-Day. Alan Gratz is known for his historical fiction. And this tells the story of D-Day, the Allied invasion of France, through a very disparate group of characters. 11-year-old Samaria, who's a French Algerian, a Canadian paratrooper, a British tank driver, an African-American medic, and a 13-year-old girl, and also a war correspondent. And it talks a lot, so it's really good for historical fiction about D-Day, and it talks about how the taking of Omaha Beach was almost a disaster. There's a lot of dramatic tension and very suspenseful read. So again, kids who are into historical fiction, that would be a really neat one to suggest. Again, I like to recommend some of these books that are really good for babies, and this is one. Wonderful Me, I Love All of Me. Again, it has a padded cover, heavy board pages with rounded edges, which is exactly what we should have for babies. I'm always surprised when publishers do books with pointed edges. It's very simple text done in rhyme. I love my wiggled toes. I love my smelly nose. I love my blinky eyes. I love my brain so wise. I love my chubby cheeks. I love my scaredy squeaks. I love my legs that run. I love my licky tongue. I love my arms that squeeze. I love my bendy knees. I love my kissy lips. I love my dancing hips. I love my tummy bump. I love my waggle rump. I love my hair all free. I love all of me. So it's celebrating the wonder of oneself. Very nicely done for the very little child. Margaret Peterson Haddocks, Ohio resident, I know because I lived in Ohio for so many years, has had several very popular series of books, and this is her newest. And it's going to be called, the series is going to be called The Greystone Secrets. And again, this is book 1. This is done for middle grade, and it blends adventure along with science fiction elements and mystery, all in one book. Something really strange is happening in the Greystone household. We have 3 kids. We have Chess, who's 12, Emma, who's 10, and Finn, who is 8. And they come home from school one day to find their mother, who is in complete despair because she's read a news story about this kidnapping. And why she is in such despair is because in the kidnapping, there are 3 children who were taken, and their names and ages are exactly the same as her children. Well, then she's called out of town, and she disappears. And the kids have to try to figure out what happened to their mother. They get a coded letter, and they feel certain that she's at risk. So they're going to set out to try to crack the code and find out where Mrs. Greystone is. Now, the kidnapping alone could have made a good mystery, but Haddocks throws in secret rooms and alternate realities and this cliffhanger ending, which is always good to have if you're going to do a series of books. There's a lot of buzz around this new series, and I think Haddocks is a popular writer, so I think it's going to be very successful. I wanted to mention this book just because when I was a practicing librarian, I always loved to do themes for my story time. Some people do themes, some don't. And it's always interesting when you can come up with a very unique, unusual theme, and one that'll make little preschoolers laugh like this. The book I'm talking about is the one up here called Just Underwear. It's that book. But I wanted to show you how in the last couple years there have been all these books about underwear, and you could do a whole story time on underwear because they're all funny stories. And as is this one, the end papers are actually a pair of jockey jockey underwear, which is unique. And the little boy is the dad's trying to get him ready for bed, and the little bear boy is doing everything, that is frustrating the dad. Where do I wear my underwear? He puts it on his head, he's swinging it around, he's making it into hair and doing everything he can, and really, really, really frustrating dad. Don't make me glare, says dad. So a funny story, but I just wanted to point out, this is still probably my favorite one, Monsters New Undies. I still love that book, probably the best. But you could do a whole program just on underwear, which would be a very funny theme to use. Okay, I like this book a lot. There's just a little bit of I don't want to say a problem, but I always am concerned when you have a picture book that's really for older children, because I'm not sure how often older children will take out what looks like a picture book. This is really done for 5th or 6th grades or even higher, but like I said, it is done kind of in a picture book format. And it talks about her, the horrible childhood experience she had, which was actually, she was raped, and that's actually mentioned in the book. It was a very traumatic rape that she endured as a child, and then how it actually rendered her mute for the first part of her life. Despite these challenging circumstances, we know that she went on to accomplish so much. But she wouldn't have if she didn't have the love and support of a few key people in her life, which it also talks about. So again, the publisher's saying that this target audience would be grades 4 to 6, and that is true, but will they take it out? I don't know, but it is very, very well done. Now, some of you might know that Mo Willems is no longer writing the Elephant and Piggy books. He is actually now an editor, in addition to writing other books, but he's an editor, and he is picking the authors of the books that he wants to publish in the easy-to-read format. So on a similar vein is Rick Warden. Now, we know Rick Warden is an extremely popular author. When some of his books came out, people camped out overnight, at bookstores to try to get the next copy, the next in the series. But what Rick Warden is doing now, he is also playing an editor role, and he is selecting books that he feels are worthy to be published. And this is one of his books that they call it the Rick Warden Presents. And this is by Carlos Hernandez. And it is a story that is taking place in Cuba. So there's a lot of folklore and Cuban culture described in the book. Sal is the main character story. He's attending a new school. There are a lot of bullies. Kids are bullying him. He has teachers that don't understand his needs because he has type 1 diabetes. But he also has learned to overcome some of this by using magic. And one of the kids finally figures out that he has a special skill where he can create tears in the universe and pull objects into this world from other realms. So it's a very fast-paced novel with a blend of science fiction and folklore, and again, a cliffhanger ending, so there'll probably be another one coming along. Jennifer Holm and Matt Holm are brother and sister. Matthew Holm and Jennifer are. And they have done the Baby Mouse books that are extraordinarily popular and have been popular for many years. This is probably what's going to be a new series for them, and it is done in a picture book format. It's called The Evil Princess versus the Brave Knight. And it is a story about sibling rivalry. Probably, I'm imagining that they themselves, being brother and sister, might have had some of that sibling rivalry growing up. The princess is the evil one. The brave knight is trying to protect the castle. So there's a lot of humor in the story. The princess shoves the knight into the bathtub, and so they have a lot of friendly battles, but it's a very funny, cute book about sibling rivalry. Okay, this next one, I can't talk about it. I just have to read it. It is a great book to share in a story program called Mr. Scruff. And again, there is a rhyme in this book. And I don't think kids will see what's coming to the very end. So this is what I'm going to read the whole way through. This is Polly. I hope you can see the pictures. This is Polly. And Polly belongs to Molly. This is Eric. He belongs to Derek. This is Minnie. She belongs to Vinny. But who's this? It's Mr. Scruff. For Mr. Scruff, there's no one. Of course, this also pulls your heartstrings. He's in this little animal rescue thing. He has no one adopting him. This is Mick. He belongs to Rick. And this is Lawrence. He belongs to Florence. But things are looking very rough for poor old Mr. Scruff. Wait a minute. Who's this? It's a boy named Jim. They seem to like each other. But Jim, says Dad, are you sure? He's so big and you're so small. I can't see it working. No, not at all. He's so old, says Mom, and you're so young. Surely a puppy would be more fun. No, says Jim, he needs a home, a place to call his very own. That's what he needs, and that's enough for me and Mr. Scruff. So, while Polly has Molly, and Eric has Derek, and Minnie has Vinny, and Mick has Rick, and Lawrence has Florence, now Mr. Scruff belongs to Jim. And though it doesn't rhyme, it seems like it's worked out just fine. But wait a minute, who's this? It's Mr. Gruff. He's come to choose a dog. Here's a little pup. They seem to like each other. I'm so big and you're so small, but that doesn't matter. No, not at all. Mr. Gruff is happy. It's the perfect dog for him. Can you guess the puppy's name? Well, of course, it's Tim. So Jim has Mr. Scruff, and Mr. Gruff has Tim. So it all worked out in the end. Very cute story. Steve Jenkins is known for his nonfiction books and his very intricate illustrations. This is done by him and his wife, Steve Jenkins, and Robin Page is his wife. And this is a whole book about frogs. And it talks about all their natural colors. Some are rendered half size, some full size. It talks about a frog that's actually the size of a ladybug, the whole way up to the African bullfrog that spills out over the pages. Each specimen is labeled. It talks about their environments, the food they eat, their mating rituals, how it goes from egg to tadpole to frog metamorphosis is in there, their defense systems, the ones that are endangered, and some that are extinct even. It gives metric body length, diet, everything, and all done in those cut paper collages that Jenkins is so famous for. Cynthia Katahata actually won a Newbery for Kira Kira, and this is her new book. 7-star reviews in this. I think every reviewing journal has given this a star. It is historical fiction about Hanako, who is 12 years old. Her father owns a restaurant, but when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, her and her family are all sent off to internment camps. And of course, that's a period of our history that we're not real proud of. Eventually, the U.S. Government offers them the offer, this wonderful offer, which isn't so wonderful. If they renounce their American citizenship, they can go back to Japan, and that's what this family does. But here they were, owning and operating this restaurant in America, and very successful, and now they're living with her father's parents, who are very poor farmers outside the city of Hiroshima. And so now life has totally changed. And they're in this very unfamiliar, war-blighted country, and how do you adapt to that? I would say everyone should have this book. It's a first choice, I think, for like every library. Disaster Strikes. This is an interesting book about all the space missions that we've had, space travel, history of space travel, where we had a problem, where there's been catastrophes or near catastrophes. Again, very well researched, very authoritative sources. It talks about the Apollo 1 fire, the Apollo 13 thrower thing that happened, the destruction of the Space Shuttle Challenger, some maybe lesser well-known tragedies of a Russian crash. It was the Soyuz 1, and then the 3 cosmonauts who were in another one of the Russian shuttles that actually were asphyxiated. So it sounds really grim, but it also talks about some successes we've had too, but it talks about how some of these disasters have happened in the history of space travel. Catherine Lasky, again, Newbery Honor. She probably is most known now, though, for some of the books she's done in her Dear America series and her Rural Diaries series. And this is a standalone book. It's not a series book, but it is time travel. And the girl Rose is living in Indianapolis with her grandmother, and she is being targeted by these vicious, mean girls at school. But she's going to end up time traveling back to the time of Princess Elizabeth's household, when Henry VIII is the king. And she actually finds her father in 16th century England. So it's a very enjoyable read of time travel. Cynthia Lord, another one who has won a Newbery Honor before, and it's got a lot of good reviews too. This is the story of Emma, who is beginning school for the first time in 5th grade. She was homeschooled. So now she's going to public school for the first time in 5th grade, and it's really rocky. She enjoyed being homeschooled, but now she finds making friends is more difficult than what she thought it would be. She gets along well with Jack, who is a boy with autism, but she notices that the other classmates keep in at a distance, and she worries whether if she befriends him, is she also going to become isolated. Now, woven throughout this story is the pet rabbit here, who she rescued, but now she finds out, she's seeing signs where the people lost their pet rabbit, and she doesn't want to give up the rabbit, she wants to keep it. So, what does she do? She's in kind of a dilemma. She's sure it's their pet rabbit. So it's a very heartfelt chapter book, and I think it will have very broad appeal. Here's another dinosaur book. Everything awesome about dinosaurs and other prehistoric beasts. The cover of the book says it has a gazillion true facts. Well, that might be a slight exaggeration, but there is a lot of really interesting, entertaining, prehistoric information. Also, it's very factual, but there's also some humor in it because it talks about, it actually even has dinosaur jokes in it. So it's a perfect choice for young dinosaur enthusiasts who want to read more, not so much a straightforward, but read facts here and there. And I think this is going to be part of a series, actually. Okay, this is actually a history of the song, which is Lift Every Voice and Sing. And it's amazing how this song has become a battle cry throughout several generations. It talks about how the song first was inspired, and its beginnings were back in the 1900s. It was written by James Welton Johnson and his brother John Johnson, and they actually wrote it to commemorate President Lincoln's birthday. But since that time, it has been like the rallying battle cry or battle song when Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, during the Civil Rights protest. It was used in 2016 when they opened the National Museum of African American History and Culture, and each generation has passed the lyrics along. And at the end of the book, they urge people to keep on singing, keep on passing it on. David Macaulay is known for his very intricate cross sections of things, and this is actually it's an interesting book because it's not only historical, talking about steam engines and other ships, but it also talks about how his family came from the United Kingdom to New York in the 1950s, 1957, aboard a ship. So it's also his crossing and his family's crossing. Of course, as you can expect from him, he's going to focus on design and engineering. We see cutaway views of boilers and turbines and powertrains and those other structural elements. So it's nonfiction, but it's also biographical, which is kind of interesting combination. Patricia McLaughlin, another Newbery medalist, and just writes very heartfelt stories herself. This, again, she's so good at conveying emotion and exploring characters, and she does the same thing here. There's two siblings who are spending the summer on their grandparents' farm. Louise is almost 12, and she's writing in secret, and she hates change. But she's going to have to confront a lot of change. And her grandmother says, change is important because it really makes you find out who you really are. She becomes friends with George, who's a young friend and neighbor, and a kindred spirit, and kind of opposite from her, though, in every other way. So it's just a nice little heartfelt, warm story, which Patricia McLaughlin is so good at writing. Immigration, of course, is a hot topic in our country today, and people are on one side of the immigration issue or on the other side of the immigration issue, I suppose. But this is a young reader's adaptation of a 217 book that was actually written for adults. about these two twins that were captured by Border Patrol agents while they're entering the U.S. And so it's really exploring the humanitarian crisis that we have at our southern border. And it talks about why they immigrated here, and why they tried to immigrate here. They were they were in El Salvador, where it was very violent, very criminal controlled zones. And so their father actually hired a smuggler to take them north. The journey is filled with danger, fear, homesickness. And they also knew that their father had to pay for them to be smuggled, and they knew when they got here they were going to have to pay back that loan somehow. They were going to have to work and pay back that loan. It talks about the fear they had and displacement they felt when they came to California. So it really gets into the heads and hearts of immigrants and their situation and why we have so many people trying to come here. They have reasons, you know, they're leaving very, very, very bad situations. So again, I think this is probably something that you'll want for teens because it is such a current topic today. Megan McCarthy has always does these wonderful little, they sort of like picture books, but they're nonfiction books, and this is all about firefighters. Everything you want to know about firefighters. I'm glad she has some women there because we have a lot of women firefighters today too. And it talks about the training they go through, what's expected of them physically, the exercises they have to do to even, you know, to drag this long hose and heavy equipment. My husband was actually a firefighter, and I could not believe if you tried to put on his coat, it was like putting one of those weighted blankets around you. It's just incredible how heavy they are. It includes diagrams, talks about how they have this protective equipment, which is really got so much better over the years. I know when my husband was serving, they really did. That's why so many of them have died from cancer. My husband and his whole crew died from cancer eventually. But now they have so much better safety equipment than what they had in the past, and they talk about that. It also talks about all the different types of firefighters, and it even gets into related professions like paramedics, because many paramedics are actually attached to the firefighting departments. So it's very accessible, comprehensive, but done for younger children. I found this, I couldn't put this next book down just because, I don't know, you start reading it and you just get really intrigued, and it's the Dion quintuplets, if I can get it out. This was back in the 30s. Where this woman, and this was not, you know, it was no fertility thing where they had so many babies. She just had these 5 children, which was, of course, back in 1934, extremely unusual. But what was so shocking about it is the government literally took them away from the family, which I did not know, and treated them almost like circus creatures because they were so different. Even up to the end, it talks about their whole life. There's a whole bunch of pictures in the middle, you know, photos and everything. Talks about the ones that died. Even up the whole way through their life, they never, ever, ever, ever had a normal life. And I just thought how sad. It was just such a sad book to read about how the government treated this family, these quintuplets. And the dialogue from the book is directly coming from diaries and books and newspapers. So it's very well researched, excellent. I don't know if kids will be interested in it, but I'm telling you, I couldn't put it down. It's very interesting read. Tell's Journey is actually a story about Ellis Island and coming here to Ellis Island. It's a Jewish-themed picture book that's actually based on a true story. I've noticed that's kind of fuzzy there. I apologize for the quality of that picture of the cover. The 9-year-old girl and her mother are preparing to immigrate to the U.S. They're going to leave their friends and family behind in Europe. But when Mama is not allowed to board the boat because she has an eye infection, they won't let her on, she wants her daughter to keep going. So she writes down the address of the relatives in New York that she needs to go to when she gets there. When she gets to Ellis Island, she discovers the paper where the address had been written is now blurred, and she can't even read it. So here, and again, this is based on a true story. So here she's a 9-year-old girl by herself in New York with nowhere to go. So it's really interesting to read. She is eventually recognized by family because her story appears in a Jewish newspaper. So she's eventually rescued, but it's a very interesting true story of her journey. This is Rodman Philbrick, who also was a Newbery Honor winner. I'm not picking all these Newbery people just because they're Newbery people. All these books that I am talking about today have had at least 4 or 5 extremely positive reviews from the reviewing journals that hopefully you look at. Horn Book, School Library Journal, Book List, Kirkus, the Bulletin for the Center of Children's Books. These all have very positive reviews. And this is one about, now of course with all the wildfires in California, this could be very topical, but this is a massive wildfire, but this is actually occurring in the mountains of Maine in this story. Very high suspense. Sam and Delphi are staying at separate summer camps, but they're on the same lake. When they have to evacuate because of the wildfires, both are left behind inadvertently, and they have to use survival skills that they learned to try to carry on. So Sam eventually does encounter Delphi while he's walking along. It's kind of it's almost like My Side of the Mountain type of book. Very well written, very intriguing, like I said, very suspenseful. They find out there are arsonists that are setting these fire, and now they have to try to, stay away from these arsonists. It's really a good read, and I think it would also be good for reluctant readers because it reads fast. It's a very fast-paced type book. Well, Lincoln Pierce is best known for his Big Nate books, which we cannot keep on our shelves in our library. And this, I think, is going to be a series. Oh, look, Dave Pilkey has even given it a recommendation, so there you know that has to be good. This is going to be a medieval adventure by this New York Times best-selling illustrator. Max is actually apprenticed to a troubadour, but he doesn't really have too much interest in singing or storytelling. He wants to be a knight. And so he ends up going to this kingdom where there's this very evil king. He joins this crew of other kids that want to be a knight like him. There's a bumbling wizard, almost everything you would want in this type of book. There's also very spunky female heroes in this book. But it is also done in that cartoony format, very top-notch, and I think kids will want it just because they like his Big Nate books. Jason Reynolds is incapable of writing a book that doesn't get all stars. He's probably one of our most gifted writers in children's literature today. Every single book he pours out always has incredible reviews. This one's hard to talk about because it's going to sound kind of like odd, but trust me, it's very well done. It's short stories, and kids never take out short story collections. They will take this one out. Trust me, they will read it. And the premise, and this is what the part that sounds odd, I know, but just trust me, it's a good book. The premise is a school bus that's falling from the sky, and there are 10 stories told in parallel, each from a different middle school student. Reynolds is just a master of character development. Each protagonist is distinct, each story is memorable, and all their stories are kind of linked together. It's really storytelling at its best. He's just an excellent, excellent writer. I actually heard this author talk about this book, and it made it even more interesting to me. Alan Bean was one of our astronauts, but see, he's the only one who was an artist. And he actually painted scenes of the moon. And because that was his passion. Even though he was an astronaut, his passion was being a painter. And this talks about the launch of that mission. Bean was one of the very few humans who walked the moon who actually was able to do artwork from it. No one else was able to do that. The author, Dean Robbins, collaborated with Bean before he died, actually in 2018, but before he died, he collaborated with him and got his approval completely on this manuscript, which I think is important because, you'd like to know that it's truthful and realistic. He saw all the original art. So it would be, I think it'd be good for like STEAM projects for teachers. You could recommend it. Sharon Robinson's written a couple books now. This is her memoir of 1963. She was the daughter of baseball legend Jackie Robinson, but she had a totally different experience than many other African-American children of her generation. She was living in because her dad was a baseball legend, she was living in this very wealthy Connecticut neighborhood. She's attending an all-white school. She owns a horse, so her whole situation's totally different. And then she started seeing TV programs featuring black people protesting, and she was trying to understand what they were protesting, because that was a part of her life that she just did not realize what was going on. And her eyes were really opened to what was happening in regards to segregation, the Little Rock Nine, Brown versus Board of Education, and church. And so that's when she became really aware of how everyone's situation wasn't the same of hers. So this is a wonderful depiction of the civil rights movement at that time. There's also a lot of pages with family photos in. Okay, so everyone knows the book by Lois Lowry called The Giver. What a lot of the publishers are doing now, and I guess they're trying to make these books more accessible to some kids who maybe are reluctant readers. What they're doing is they're making them into graphic novels, and that's what this is. So it's a graphic novel adaptation of the Newbery book. So it's going to be under P. Craig Russell and not Lois Lowry, but of course the dialogues pulled directly from her source book. So if you're looking for another format to recommend to some of these reluctant readers, that might be one you want to think about. Cynthia Rylant, another one of her fantastic writers, and she writes in every format. She does picture books and I Can Reads and fiction and nonfiction, and she's done everything in the world. Again, very good characterization, fun adventures. This is a new series she's doing called Motor Mouse, and has 3 separate tales. It's very well paced, kind of cartoon style illustrations. It's done in picture book format, but it's actually kind of meant for beginning readers. So that'd be kind of interesting to watch when it comes to the Geisel Award. Sometimes the Geisel Award, which is for the I Can Read books, sometimes they do have picture books that have that type of format. So this might be one to look at for this, but it's a good example of an early reader. Okay, this is the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall riots, and this is a book for kids on that. Again, I have a little bit of a problem. I mean, it's more of a dense text, but it still has that picture book look to it, which, you always wonder then, will older kids read it? Because it's really kind of done for a little bit of an older reader. But it's the whole history of that, of what happened with the revolution of the LGBTQ movement. That happened June 28, 1969 was when this all happened. So it is a celebration of Stonewall, and it's good to have books like this for kids who want to identify, as an LGBTQ person. Okay, so this is I was talking about Mo Williams earlier and how he's no longer doing the Elephant Piggy books, but he's an editor now picking stories in this early reader format. Interestingly, it talks about, it says by Mo Williams and it crosses it out by Denson Tat. And the Harold and Hog here are actually pretending to be Elephant and Piggy. So there's a lot of Mo Williams humor in it. It's a very hilariously funny book, and it's perfect for people who are fans of Gerald and Piggy and know there aren't going to be more books because Mo Williams isn't doing any more of them. So this is a nice little second choice, I guess you would say. The Invisible Thread is, and I just forgot the name of the movie. Oh my gosh. Was it Blind Ambition? Anyhow, this is I can't pull it, but this is a young reader's adaptation of adult memoir of a woman who just had a chance encounter with this young boy, Maurice. This is a true story, who was panhandling in the streets of New York City. She first walked by him, crossed the street, changed her mind, came back, and actually offered to buy him lunch. And when you read the description of him going into McDonald's, he's 11 years old for the first time in his life and couldn't believe what the hamburger tasted like. It was just, he thought he was in heaven. I mean, he was a very, very poor family living in a very bad area. Anyhow, their friendship grew and continued. He's now an adult, and they're still in touch. And you know, he gives her total credit for how his life turned out. And so there's all these photos of her and him. There was a really sad part of the book where she wanted to take him to a ball game, which he's never been to in his life, and he was, just wanted to go so bad. And so the woman went to where he lived to try to get permission, and it was a very, very bad area. He told her later, don't ever come back. But the mother, who was very heavily on drugs, like, what do you want with my child? But the grandmother finally approved it, and he did get to go. But it's very kind of heartwarming about this relationship they had. I know you can't see the pictures, but from there, but well, maybe a little bit. But this is her now and him, and he's an adult now. But it's just incredible what happened in his life, totally because one person took him under her wing. Again, as an adult book, it was a New York Times bestseller book, and now it's adapted for young readers. Okay, we love John Cheska. And this is a new book by John Cheska. It's a new series book by him called Astro Nuts. Not astronauts, Astro Nuts. Very wacky, graphic novel. I would say it probably would appeal to people who like Captain Underpants. In this story, Earth is being overrun by pollution. So the NASA, which is not the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, deploys 4 mutated animal astronauts, which was misspelled as astronauts, who are supposed to find an ideal planet so that they can relocate all of humanity. So we have Alpha Wolf, who is the boss, Smart Hawk, who is supposed to check out the climates, Laser Shark, who must look for food, and this is my favorite, Stink Bug, who has to seek shelter. Very funny, science fiction. Again, we have some STEM possibilities there, but it's going to be popular. Oh, I do have it here. I meant to open it up just so you can get an idea of what it looks like inside. It really does have a graphic novel type look to it. But there's a lot of science facts within the book. So, kids will love it. There's no doubt about it, they will love it. This book is getting just incredible notice. It's a historical novel by Ruda about the dark secrets of Francisco Franco's fascist rule of Spain and what was actually happening then. I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if this would win some kind of award. Maybe not. I always hate to say that because it's like the kiss of death when I say that, but it's very, very powerful read. It's 1950s in Madrid. An 18-year-old photojournalist is staying at this Hilton hotel with his Texas oil tycoon father and his Spanish mother. And he befriends this hotel employee, and he's turning his camera lens on local people and trying to take a lot of pictures of all this and what's happening. But the dark reality was that Franco, they actually stole children. The church was part of this government collusion. There was a lot of murder of Franco's political adversaries, abuse of children who were taken from their families. It really sheds light on a very disturbing chapter in the 20th century, our 20th century history. and helps break the silence and expose the tragedy of over 300,000 children who were adopted, 300,000 children who were adopted or stolen during Franco's rule. So it's a very powerful book. Seymour Simon, of course, is one of our best nonfiction writers today, and this is all about our guts and our digestive system. He talks all about, it actually goes way beyond into other parts of digestion. He covers the whole thing, what goes in, what goes out, but also what happens in between. But one of the most interesting things I found was just like all the misconceptions we have. For instance, he asked children to point to their stomach, and they always point like here, like by their belly, you know, and that's not where our stomach is. It turns out it's up a lot higher. I did not know that, because you hold your stomach, I have a bellyache. Well, your stomach's really up here, so I don't know what it is. But it was just very interesting. There's a lot of interesting facts in that book. Daring Dozen talks about the days of men on the moon, and tells their stories with the moon landing in 1969. A lot of interesting photographs. We have an afterword here again, also by Alan Bean. A lot of back matter. It'd be great for nonfiction, for reports. It talks about the astronauts and their journeys and some of the things they left behind, like a flag, a golf club, a photo of their family they left on the moon. But it's just a really interesting exploration of those people who actually walked on the moon. There's something about this next book that reminds me of the movie Family Trap. I think that's what it was called. I don't know why, it just does for some reason. Okay, so the 12-year-old girl in the story, Bet, is kind of like looking at her dad's emails. And she finds out two pieces of very upsetting information. One, that her father has fallen in love with a man that she's never met. And the two men are scheming to try to get their daughters together. So they're going to send Bet and the man's 12-year-old daughter away to summer camp. Well, she's furious when she finds this out. But she gets the girl's email address to break the horrible news to her. And the girls vow they're not going to speak to each other during the summer. But despite their differences, they end up forming a strong bond. And now they decide they would love to be sisters. They actually, really like each other. However, their fathers are going to a business trip to China, and they break up. And now the girls who look forward to being sisters are very determined to try to find a way for them to get their fathers back together again. The story is told mostly through emails and letters, and honestly, it is just laugh out loud funny. Well, this is an interesting nonfiction book about the American prisoners that were taken by North Vietnam. And it's another one of these books that was written for adults, but now they've also written it for young readers. It's very riveting. It mostly tells the story of Jeremiah Denton. In 1965, he took off from the aircraft carrier Independence on a bombing mission over North Vietnam. It was never completed. He was shot down, captured, and put with all these other POWs. But he was the ranking person. So he had to try to keep up the morale of all these POWs who were beaten and held captive in inhumane solitary confinements, provided very little food. It was called the Hanoi Hilton. You probably heard of that. But it was his responsibility to lead and encourage. There were over 400 of these prisoners. And it really tells the story. It's not for the faint of heart, because it talks about the torture and actually what happened to them. They weren't released until February of 1973 after almost 8 years of captivity. I lived during this period. I remember I just kept thinking how horrible it was they were there all that time. Some of you might remember that John McCain was also one of those prisoners of war, because they talk a lot about how he was held captive all that time. Okay, we have another immigration type story. This is Dear America. It's the story of an undocumented citizen, Jose Vargas. And it is also another young reader's adaptation of an adult memoir. The Dear America actually was done by Pulitzer Prize-winning journalists, and it talks about this immigrant and his story and how he came here. He was only 12 years old when he was brought to the U.S. from the Philippines to live with his grandparents, but he did not know that he was sent to the U.S. illegally. So when he applied for a learner's permit was when he first found out the truth that he was illegal in this country. And now he had to hide, even though he had been living his normal life. After all that time, now he has to hide. So again, based on a true story, it asks a lot of questions about what happens to those who enter the U.S. without documentation. There are, as I said, 12 million undocumented immigrants currently in the U.S., and maybe that's why it is such a hot-button issue for us today. When I read 12 million, I thought, my gosh, that sounds like an awful lot. So I had to find out what our population of the U.S. is, and I don't know if you know or not. I sure didn't. Supposedly, we have 329 million people in the U.S., so 12 million of them are undocumented immigrants. I just wanted to look it up because I was kind of curious. This is the whole story about Charles Schulz, the creator of Peanuts and Snoopy the dog. It's a picture book biography. Early elementary grades would be a good audience for this. And it follows all about his birth and how he even began to write this story of a boy and his beloved and smart dog. Talks about his lifelong love of drawing, encouragement that he received from his teachers, parents, and friends. But, just like Dr. Seuss, Theodore Geisel, he sent multiple submissions to publishers before he was finally offered a contract. So for any of you who are writing and feel, if you actually get your book, you get rejection letters, realize that even some of the best have gone through that. It's a wonderful homage to Charles Schulz, and like I said, a biography for young readers. Okay, Walter Wick is probably best known for his I Spy books, and Can You See What I See? But he also wrote this award-winning book called A Drop of Water, which is still highly recommended on a lot of nonfiction lists. This is his new book about light, and it is incredible. It's as well done as A Drop of Water. It talks about, it kind of looks like an oversized picture book, but it's again a much denser text. But it talks about the properties of light, incandescence, radiation, wavelengths, refraction, the color spectrum. There's a lot of full color photographs. Extremely well done. I can't imagine it won't win some type of awards, if not from the American Library Association, probably from some of the science organizations or something else. Totally different book from Mo Willems called Because. Not anything like any of his books in the past. Not one iota. But it talks about how our lives can be influenced by one little thing. I love the end papers here. Has a Symphony No. 8 in B minor. It talks about, okay, I'll read just a little bit of it. Because a man named Ludwig, that would be Beethoven, wrote beautiful music, a man named Franz was inspired to create his own. Because many years later, people wanted to hear Franz's beautiful music, they formed an orchestra. Because a man had practiced since he was a kid, he was asked to join. Because a woman studied night and day, she too was asked to play. Because many others loved to practice their instruments, there were enough musicians. Because someone created a poster about Franz's music, tickets were sold. Because the train conductor stopped the train at the Grand Concert Hall, the orchestra conductor arrived. Because the orchestra librarian had copies of the score, the orchestra rehearsed. The workers checked the lights, the seats, swept the floors, the grand hall was ready. Because the time had come, the ushers opened the door. Because someone's uncle caught a cold, someone's aunt had an extra ticket for someone special. Because the usher helped the aunt and her special guest, they found a special guest is a little girl. I will go to the back of the book. This little girl, because of all these things, because this happened, at the end, she becomes a director herself of an orchestra at the very end, because of all this that happened and the influence it had on her. So again, a very, very different book for Mo Willems. This next one's definitely for senior high. 16-year-old Nate's best friend Dodge dies in a boating accident on this very remote lake in northern Ontario. But no one can find his body. His body is missing. 4 months pass. Nate is determined he's going to find this body himself. He heads out to the lake and to the camps that both he and Dodge's family owns. He wants to make the camp his base, but he's startled to find out that 2 men have occupied it. He realizes these 2 men are escaped convicts, and he also realizes that if he's discovered, he's also going to be killed. Very much a page-turning book. It's a mashup of mystery, but also survival story for kids who like that type of thing. I think it's going to be very popular. Okay, my last book I want to talk about today is a new series written by Henry Winkler and Lynn Oliver, who have written series together before. And I will admit right on camera that I have the most huge crush on Henry Winkler imaginable. When he first started writing books way back when, I was invited to a dinner at the American Library Association conference in Chicago. There was only like 12 of us invited. And at that time, when we were leaving, he's such a nice person, and it's genuine. You just know it is. And people were going out, and he was shaking everyone's hands. And the woman ahead of me actually reached out and hugged him. And I'm like, could I hug Henry Winkler? So I decided I was going to try to do that, and I did. And he kissed me on my cheek. And I didn't want to wash my face for like a week or 2 weeks after. I was the only one that got a kiss. Speed ahead to this past summer at the American, that was how many years ago? Speed ahead to this summer, the American Library Association conference. I was invited to a lunch where he was going to be at. There was more people this time. I think there was like 24, I think there was like 3 tables of 8, if I remember correctly. So I was running a little bit late because it was hard to get around from one thing to another, and I couldn't find where this thing was. I finally found the restaurant, and then it was like in the basement or something. I couldn't figure out where I was going, and this one person says, just get on this elevator here. This is not the normal elevator, but just get on it, it'll take you there. I get on, guess who gets on the elevator? Henry Winkler and his publicist. And so I'm riding the elevator with them, and he says hello, and acted like a typical high school kid that has a crush on someone. I said, I met you before years ago. Just like blabbered all this stuff. But he really, really is nice. And unfortunately, I did not get to sit at his table this time. There was like 3 tables, and so I was a little disappointed. I was actually with this publicist table, but I didn't get to sit with him. But, and I'm not making this up, we had a terrible long wait for the meal. I don't know what happened at this place. And it was just, we were sitting there for like an hour, and we were getting nothing. And I think even he was getting kind of like, he literally, I'm not making this up, he literally got up, he walked over to the table I was sitting at, he reached down and picked up my sunglasses, and he autographed them. I'm the only person that got autographed sunglasses. So I now can no longer use those sunglasses because I lose sunglasses or I break them. So just in case you don't believe that I'm telling you the truth, whoops, oh, I'm sorry. There we are. There I am with Henry Winkler. You see all my little convention stuff on. Don't ask me why I'm wearing this blouse where you're seeing my strap. Don't ask me, I don't know, I should have had, no, we won't go there. And there he is holding the book, Alien Superstar. I know I haven't talked about the book yet. All I'm talking about is Henry Winkler, so let's try to go back. And by the way, this is a dumb sidelight, but if you ever get to watch his movie he's done on Hallmark, it's an older movie, but they still play it now, and it's called The Most Wonderful Time of the Year. And I just think he's fabulous in that movie. I love seeing him in that movie. So whenever I'm going to try to find out when it's coming on Hallmark. Anyhow, let's get to Alien Superstar. He and Lynn Oliver have written series books together for a long time now, and they work. I've heard them talk before about how well they work together. And this is science fiction, obviously, and it really brings in his own personal experiences because the alien's name is Buddy, and Buddy's 13 years old, and when they reach the age of 13, they get this special sensory enhancer that allows them to experience the world, that did allow them to experience the world around them. It's removed. So to stop this from happening, Buddy's grandmother decides she wants to plan an escape route for him. So she does, and he ends up in Planet Earth in, of all places, Universal Studios, which I'm sure Henry Winkler knows a lot about. And so here he is, an alien on Universal Studios property, and everyone thinks he's just part of a movie. They don't realize he's really an alien. So he ends up getting a job at a popular TV sitcom, and it's just, you can see Henry Winkler's influence throughout this book, but it's very, very funny. I think it's going to be another popular series, so look into that. Well, thank you very much for listening to my reviews of some wonderful books that have come out this fall. There's still more books coming out this year. I still have tons more boxes of books to go through, but here's just a few that you can think about right now that might be good things to add to your libraries. Thank you very much.